Welcome, everyone. I am Enrique Acosta Gonzales, and I am joined by Ashkan Tashvir. And in this episode, we will be speaking about leading through chaos, the art of crises sense making. Ashkan, chaos is all around us, and it seems to be prevailing through wars, conflicts, government turmoil, and even the volatility in our own daily lives. But there is something leaders can do during these times to help their people be resilient and overcome. And I can't wait to get into this discussion.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Enrique. Um, how about we start creating the context, touching on integrity again, So we often talked about, we talk about integrity, but not integrity in a sense of being of a high moral standard. But another definition to the word integrity, which is being whole, complete, unbroken, in a perfect condition. Now, in another word, when we're talking about integrity, it's like all the constituent parts of a system, a whole, being in their rightful place. Now, imagine that if you have a mechanical watch, if all the cogs in the machine are in their rightful place and the functioning, and the overall integrity, it's going to bring workability and functionality that it's expected from that machine. Yeah. Similarly, that and the sense of integrity we can have when it comes to the ecosystem, the way that the climate works, the way that the whole ecosystem works, etc., etc. Now, so um, but then what does it mean when we say a healthy relationship with integrity? It's like you do have a sense of integrity. You know what it is like to have things in their rightful place, relatively. Now, here's the thing. Um, matters in life, the things that happen in life, they're going to come our way, and they're going to shatter the relative integrity that we have established all the time. Whoever has lived enough, they have experienced this phenomena enough that everything is all right, but then something happens, or certain things happen, or we cause something, or sometimes we don't cause anything directly, um, and we're not the source of the um, problems that are going to come our way. But yet we are response able. We are able to respond, hopefully appropriately, in being a primary cause of the matter, regardless of the source. So that's what we have in the distinction responsibility in the being framework. So matters in life occur to us, like it just comes our way, they come our way, and then we ought to respond with a level of autonomy that we have. Now, so therefore, we're going to be in a continuous state of having a little bit of integrity in our life, but then things happen, and we're going to be in chaos. And again, if you have a good healthy sense of integrity, then we do our best to restore our integrity. And again, things may happen that they're going to shatter that integrity that we have established. So this is kind of a pattern of life. This is the easiness of life. This is not like how I want it to be, how you want it to be. This is how life is ontologically and phenomenologically. This is a shared experience amongst all human beings, perhaps transhistorically. It has always been like that. We've tried to respond to the matters through technology, the development of the science, trying to make life more predictable. But like we are not in the state that we can predict everything, we can engineer everything, we can create the tremendous amount of efficiency around all matters. So therefore, I'm creating this context. And I mean, like one very good example of that was in the pandemic, like the coronavirus, COVID-19 situation that perhaps like It is said that all these viruses, like if you collect them all together, you could keep them in a spoon. There's so little microorganisms that they are, but they could have like stop lots of things in the world. It created lots of problem. Not only lots of people lost their life, the medical practitioners they needed to be constantly involved. It impacted all different industries, particularly the economy of the world, um, to the extent that some consequences of that are still there, and we cannot completely recover properly. So now creating all that, um, so what we're saying is in that chaos, we still need to lead through, and as we had it in the title of this episode, we said the art of crisis sense making, because the very thing that is going to happen at the time of crisis is like we're going to get out of our mind. We're not able to fully grasp what is going on, and part of it is harmonic because like when the adrenaline hits and etc., then you're not going to be in the most sane way that you typically are in conducting proper analysis or meta analysis to see what is going on, you know. So before continuing, like what do you think, Enrique, like what do we typically do when it comes to crisis. So certain things happening, we're out of integrity. The integrity of our life is being shattered. We are in a mode of crisis. What is our typical natural response?
Yeah, I've seen preservation as the
Mhm.
typical response. How do we get through it our own selves
Yeah,
prior to trying to help anybody else? You know, it's almost that airline episode where all the gas masks come down.
yeah,
The very first thing they tell you is to throw it on yourself first, right? Put it on yourself first and then go ahead and so that preservation kicks in. Sometimes it's a good thing and sometimes it has been an ugly thing.
yeah. So when we perceive um, the situation to be chaotic, to be we find ourselves to be in crisis. There are certain natural responses that we can have, like for example, as you said, or for example, resignation. Like we may give up. I mean, go. You know what? What else I can do? It's going to impact our sense of freedom or self-expression. We may find ourselves victim to the circumstance, as if like life is something that is occurring to us and we have no say. And that victimization can lead to self-sabotage. Like we may sit there and then we may blame ourselves or blame others, even and and so these are some of the uh, immediate responses that we can see. Or for example, we can be quite reactive and we may be in a kind of survival mode, and we may just want to do something and not giving it proper time and effort to actually see if it's the best thing that we can do or not. Like we want to react now in cases, depends on the situation, sometimes we actually do need to react, like time matters, even if we are not coming up with the best solution. But in certain other cases, we don't necessarily need to panic and make a rushed decision that it's going to perhaps create the problem worse. But these are some of the typical reactions or responses that we may have at the time of crisis. But so now let's discuss what we may be suggesting here. So the art of sense making or the art of crisis sense making. First of all, like why are we calling it art? You think?
Well, it takes a person to be able to create something out of seemingly nothing, right? Chaos doesn't really isn't really defined. It's just things are everywhere all
Yeah,
at once. And you have to have the ability take all those little pieces of what could be considered nothing and make something out of it. That is creativity. That is what art is, the word that we're using today.
Yeah. So in the last episode, we actually talked about the meta content discourse, which I have in the book, meta content, the substrate, the intellectual substrate for sense making. Now, as the name suggests, is like, and most often when it comes to sense making, immediately our mind goes to the intellectual side. We go, oh, like I need to tap into my intellect and I need to make sense of what's going on here. And obviously, that's a big part, but it's not the only part. Yeah. So yes, from an intellectual perspective, like we have multiple different layers. We talked about it in the previous episode. The things like our cognitive map, what things are for us, and what's the relation and the relationships hold true between them, or our mental models, how things work in my world, what is my processes in dealing with things, how do I resolve a conflict, how do I respond to something that I'm not the source of and it's still impacting me in life, how do I deal with my angry neighbor, with my cheating partner, with my naughty children, like that they're causing lots of problem in the school, like these how to's, like they sit there and we discuss perspectives, which angles we're looking in to the matter from, or other layers, other intellectual layers. But here we deliberately are saying the art of crisis sense making, particularly at a time of crisis. It's not like with our with the limitations that our sensory abilities have, our perceptual structure has, and our rationality, particularly in the time of crisis, if you're going to understand something fully, I mean, that's a massive expectation to put on yourself, because that is not going to happen. In most cases, that is not going to happen. You don't have that ease of mind, you don't have that peace of mind, you don't have that um, ability to collect all this data and information, and and access the knowledge that is required for you to really fully make sense of things. And the nature of it, especially in the time at the time of crisis, is partly we need to tap into our intuition. It's the balance, the balancing rationality with intuition. That's a very, very important part. Or we are in a situation that we need to interpret complexity with elegance. Um, it's an art-like thing, yeah. So yes, it is intellectual in part, but there is nuanced details. There is the combination of different epistemological approaches that you need to bring in. I just mentioned, for example, intuition. We want to see what our gut feeling is. At the same time, we want to not only rely on that, then try to gather some sort of intelligence, some part of the information that they can be verified and are factual, and some other parts that you basically may need to come up with your best guesses. Yeah, so they gather the intelligence to me. So this requires not only an engineering approach, but a more artistic approach to be able to bring all this and in a creative manner try to make sense of what's going on. Yeah. um and, and another one is, especially in the time of at the time of crisis, there is this big part that you can consider them unpredictable. So adapting to the unpredictable also is a process that it's required a more artistic approach. So having said all this, like, do you have any tangible examples of this that comes to your mind, like the time of crisis, and then how more creatively you basically need to make sense of things beyond your intellect?
Yeah, one of the ones that comes to my mind is a time on what we call
Mm.
battle stations on ships. Sometimes you have a catastrophic loss of a thing, machinery, usually, or you have blown pipes, or even fires. And so in those times, there are trainings that come in, and you can rely on that training that usually pops up in your head. But
Yeah,
you have a catastrophic flooding event, and now you have pipes that are broken in pieces that you have no structure to actually contain. You have to become creative in saying, okay, right now, the typical things to address this crisis are not viable. I need to start creating something. What can I use? What can I
yeah,
implement? What can I grab? And then
yeah,
get a hold of the crises to a point where we now all collectively can address the issue. And it's
yes,
always typically during those times in on seagoing vessels where you
yeah,
see creativity come out in ways that you never thought were possible.
yes, yes. No, I can see. The thing is, like especially like since I've done the meta content book, and so that's more deliberately is more focusing on the intellectual substrate for our sense making, and I acknowledge that throughout the whole book that it's not the only part to our consciousness and our sense making, but it's a very important part. And hopefully in the next books, I will cover the areas that it's not covered in the meta content. But so one question would come up immediately is like, why is it that like intellect alone is not enough in crisis sense making? So and particularly like the ones who are pure rationalists, like they go, we need to tap into our rationality. Our rationality is the ultimate answer to everything. So there are factors to take into consideration. For example, I mean, the complexity, like the complexity and unpredictability nature of the crisis, or what the uh, chaotic situation would demand. Um, it requires beyond analytical reasoning. Yeah. So we need to look into these factors. For example, one of them is human factors in crisis. Yeah. So you're dealing with us human beings. We have emotional sides. So like imagine that the flood is happening, the pandemic is happening. There's lots of unknown and everything, and people are losing their beloved ones. People are so scared of not even knowing what kind of virus this is, like how this virus is going to behave, how severe that is. Like some people may just be more conservative than others. Some people they may, you know, be more scared than others, and so you're dealing with the emotional and psychological experiences of those involved, including the people that are going to make decisions. And like leaders sometimes need to make rush decisions, and it's extremely hard to put everything in every different dimensions into consideration, every different factors into consideration to make a decision. And this is something that perhaps many may not be fully present to how hard it is to actually put yourself in the shoes of the leaders that are going to make decisions. But it's not only the leaders, everyone. Like taking this human factor um, in consideration. Another one is the ambiguity and uncertainty that exists like at the time of crisis. Is again like related to the first one, as we said. It's like you don't know how this virus is going to really behave. You don't know what the best solution is going to be. There was lots of controversies around like whether the government should have mandated people staying at home, lockdowns, or not. I mean, and like I don't have a particular view on the matter. We're just like using it as an example. The diverse views, the like you have incomplete, like especially at the time of crisis, you have incomplete or conflicting information coming in. And it's extremely hard to verify all of these information in a very short period of time. If you wanted to just purely rely on data, if you wanted to rely on um, analytical reasoning. Now, that doesn't mean that that justifies whatever decisions that we're making. It's not about justification of that. It's just like to acknowledge that um, sense making in a crisis or crisis sense making, it's beyond the just like analytical reasoning or purely tapping into our intellect, and it requires a more artistic way to look at it. Yeah. What else comes to your mind, Enrique?
Well, you mentioned intuition earlier,
Yeah.
and a lot of people don't give themselves credit enough to allow that to play a role, especially
Yeah.
during crises. And it's very important to for folks to understand that the totality of our life is a training environment. We're adapting and we're accepting and we're taking in different types of information. And at the end of the day, you have to do what's best for your safety, the people, and so on and so forth, right? And a lot of times we don't allow ourselves to make that judgment call on that thing we call intuition, something that's
Mm.
very intangible. We don't know what it is that it is sometimes until we get into a crisis.
Yeah.
And that's the whole reason why we have some people become heroes in a situation that more than likely would have never been a hero in a standard situation. And
Yeah.
so it's usually because all those things come at a surface, they employ it, and voila, you have a great outcome to something that could have been terrible.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. 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 So now, so when I've mentioned the intellectual substrate for our sense making, and then we're talking about the art, so it's not like either this or that. Yeah, I mean, basically, when we use the word art, it can include the both parts, like how that's how I would see it. But um now it doesn't mean that like purely just like tap into your intuition or just like what I call in the meta content discourse or the nested theory of sense making as one of the initial um layers to our sense making, which is initial insight, or sometimes I call them abductive given or abductive revelation. Basically, in a simple language, the very first thing that comes to our mind, it is strikes us. Yeah, that's why we call it the strike. It's just like comes like touches you. And a typical thinker would be the person who would take that and go, okay, here's my thought. Wait a moment, steady this ship. This is just something came to your mind for whatever reason. It can be credible, but very likely it's not going to be fully credible. So it needs to pass through certain other layers so that you can validate its credibility, or you can basically authenticate that, like check the congruence of that as much as possible. And obviously the time of crisis is going to be hard, but just to tap into the meta content discourse, the nested theory of sense making in the time of crisis. Now, for those of you may be interested to know more about the meta content discourse directly, like there's an episode before this episode that in the playlist that you can definitely watch or listen to. But I'm assuming that that is watched in a way that I'm going to go through this. So building awareness of our existing meta content extremely important. Now, this is not a practice like to go through after the crisis, but basically a person who has a self-awareness, they have a good understanding, authentic understanding of their existing meta content, the layers of their sense making, would have a better chance of encountering the crisis and then see where exactly um, that would fit. Yeah, so basically a person is more in top and in charge of their existing meta content would not be as confused very likely as a person who doesn't have a sense of their existing meta content or the existing framework of thought. Another one is like, particularly at the time of crisis, we want to bring epistemic humility, and that's another thing that the meta content discourse promotes. That openness, the vulnerability, vulnerability around unpredictability of matters, and knowing that it's not only you set the priorities for your life, but any other force out in the world, it can actually cause that even a little. microorganism that you can barely see or you cannot see uh, unless you use microscopes. So it's extremely important to bring that epistemic humility. Um, and this highlights the importance of exploring multiple perspectives and being receptive to the complexity without just resorting to binary thinking that either these or that. Now, this takes us to the next one, which is quite important, as I've noted here for myself, is creating dialogue, not debates. And this is an extremely important thing. Yes, we love debates like intellectuals that they like this party or that party, like the Labor Party, the uh, Democrat Party, Liberal Party. They want, sometimes they want to use those opportunities to actually point fingers and go, oh, did could you see, like, we were predicting these, but you did ignore it, etc., etc. At the time of crisis, the last thing that you want is to go through separation, the literature and the language of division, creating polarization in the society or in the team. And the best is basically bringing multiple different perspectives, seeing what works, what doesn't work, bringing that level of vulnerability in and create dialogue so that through this dialectic process of thesis, antithesis, thesis, antithesis, like we can synthesize, and from the solicitation of various different views, we can make the best decisions, especially because the time matters so much. And in general, I would say, despite applying the nested theory of sense making and going through all of these layers to make sense of something, it is relatively a time consuming thing in its totality. But at the same time, if someone is equipped with the nested theory of sense making and the model, they can actually be quite quick in their encounterment to what is happening, which caused the crisis. They can actually tap into that, and then they can look and break the complexity of what is going on down into smaller, more digestible parts. And let's say, for example, in a team environment where there are multiple different decision makers, um, let's say the board of a company or an organization, the executive team, if they are equipped with the nested theory of sense making, it'll help them to break down the complexity of the crisis, even in a short period of time, and that's going to make help them pay attention to the parts that are misplaced or misconstructed, or the parts that they need to be addressed first. So that's going to help us with this strategy. um, and also from a being framework perspective, for example, like embedding intentionality into the leadership. So how does it land to you before I continue? So what does that mean? Like at the time of crisis, like we embed intentionality into our leadership. Enrique.
Yeah,
Enrique.
there's a lot of wise, adaptable, and
Yeah.
intellectual people around us at all times. We
Yeah.
cannot be thought of as a leader that has it all, right? Even
Yeah.
in crises, but
Mm,
even on a normal, there are people that are around us that are there for the help of the solutions of everything that we want. So,
yeah.
especially during crises, that's when you want to employ those.
Yes. 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 Yeah. Um. Yeah. So I think that's pretty much it. To recap, the state of integrity is real. Is part of the easiness of life. It's not a created concept or construct. Um, we all phenomenologically seek integrity, um, and uh, and we want our life to work, and it's not going to work. Like there's not going to be much effectiveness if there in any system there is a lack of integrity. At the same time, we know that it's quite idealistic to think that we're going to build the integrity of our life and nothing is going to challenge it. No, lots of different forces are going to challenge the overall integrity of your life and the integrity of your being. including your own self. Like you're going to be sitting there and then you're going to have thoughts and the mental traffic, and then you're going to get disappointed at yourself or blame yourself and self sabotage and victimization. So, our own self, our own ego can actually be um, the one of the forces, but then there are other forces out there. So we know that our integrity is going to be challenged and sometimes going to be shattered. At the same time, if we have a relatively healthy relationship with integrity, then we want to we are we are the one who take the responsibility to restore the integrity as it's needed. So in order for us to restore the integrity, we need to make sense of things. We need to understand them. Now, making sense of things, as we discussed in the meta content discourse, like we can go through the layers and like conduct analysis, etc., trying to understand the mental models, cognitive map, narratives, the way that we are interpreting matters, etc. At the same time, we know that it's going to be really hard at the time of crisis with the hormones coming up, with like reactivity, with like all of these emotional human factors, like psychological factors. So making sense of things is going to be harder, but still, life, sometimes even harshly, would demand us to make sense of things authentically, shape credible views. At the same time, we know that the time of crisis, you're going to be dealing with incomplete information or conflicting information. So we said the antidote to that is one, bringing epistemic humility, bringing intentionality in the thing, focusing on addressing, identifying the missing parts so that we can prioritize and we can address the things that's needed, avoiding um, debate, but creating dialogue, ensuring that like we with vulnerability, we can put the ideological differences aside. We can actually from the solicitation of various different views, multiple different perspectives, multiple different perceptions, and multiple different interpretations of what is going on. Like I'm tapping into meta content language, then coming up with the best solutions at hand, so that basically we can minimize the amount of damages and the mistakes. So that's the best thing that we can do, um, uh, I think, at the time of crisis. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. We've covered a lot, but yeah. So I hope that you benefited from that. And if you're interested to know more about the meta content discourse, there's a book, Meta Content. You can definitely look into it. Thank you very much for being with us, Enrique, and thank you very much, everyone. Bye.